Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just give everyone 1 or 2 minutes to join, and then we'll kick off literally in a few seconds. So just wait for everyone to join the webinar. So I think we are ready to start. Thank you so much for joining us at the T&E's presentation of our new report that we have released this morning, in fact. So first of all, before I give you all a very quick welcome on behalf of T&E, I'd like to remind us all about a few housekeeping rules. So first of all, this webinar will be recorded, so you all know, and it will be available as well to share it with everyone afterwards. And we will also have a question and answer session here. So please use the button you see at the bottom of your screen. So there is a black question mark to pose your questions, and we will get to them after we've heard all of our speakers today. So I'm Julia, I am Senior Director with T&E, and I would like to do a very quick introduction into what it is that we're going to do for the next hour. So first of all, phrases like electric cars will crash the grids are still something that we do hear sometimes in Europe and beyond Europe as well. However, it is quite clear that, of course, electric vehicles will require more and more electricity, but it is also a battery, a mobile battery on wheels that actually in many cases, unless you're a very busy taxi driver, is available and not used 90% of the time. And because the costs for an electric vehicle and therefore the battery have already been paid off, it's actually the cheapest, in fact, a free resource that we can use and make use for our energy system. Using electric vehicles to store energy and feed back to the grid is not just possible via the bidirectional or V2X charging. It's also something that can save motorists money and actually make our energy system more resilient. This is a realization that we are now starting to have across the world. And today, with the support of Fraunhofer, to whom we have commissioned this analysis, we would like to dig deeper into what this battery on wheels opportunity means for Europe, for key countries, and us all as current or future electric car drivers. So electric vehicles will represent 10% of the EU's total electricity demand. So it's a lot of energy, but they are also a solution. So today we will hear more about just how much energy and support they can provide to the system. We will dig deeper into the massive money savings that this can mean, not just for the system, but for the individual drivers. We'll see what can this do to help the grids. And most importantly, all of this, as you will see, can be done while not worsening battery performance, and some feared in previously. But what's the catch? This is all very good and nice, and you might ask, well, it's a no-brainer. However, there are still many barriers. And today, this is still not done at scale, and various problems from the lack of flexible tariffs to the slow smart meter rollout, or quite crucially, not yet a scaled enabled V2X capability in all the cars. All of this is something that is stopping this from being used. So we'll also deep dive into the policies and see what can be done, as we have the new set of politicians in Europe, in Brussels today, what can be done in the coming years to actually solve that and to really utilize that potential of battery on wheels. So without further ado, I would like to first introduce and hear from the authors of this analysis. So we will first of all hear from Fraunhofer. We will then move to us as T&E to present to you a deep dive into the policy recommendations. And then we will hear from some of the key stakeholders in this debate, notably the business perspective and a very important regulator perspective, after which we'll switch to the Q&A. So without further ado now, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Marian Klobas and Yanis Kala to present the key findings of this analysis. Yes, so please unmute yourselves and you can start sharing the screen.
Yes, Julia. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. So we'd like to present to you today the results of our study that we did on behalf of Transport and Environment. It was a joint effort by Fraunhofer ISI in Karlsruhe and Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy in Freiburg. So you see here also the names of the other authors who gratefully and substantially contributed also to the study. And we like to pinpoint some of the key results and outcomes of the study. So we are not able to show everything, but I think we picked up some of the key results, and you can have a look into more details also in the report that has been published today. So what I want to show you today, what are the key topics and the research question that lies behind that. We addressed the question of the benefits of smart and bidirectional charging from three perspectives. The first one is on the power system in general, which I will present. Then we have the view on the grids and the impacts of smart and bidirectional charging on the grid, and what costs and savings can be realized there, as well as the user perspective, where we dig deeper into the benefits that EV users can gain if they use smart and bidirectional charging at home. This tool will be presented then by my colleague Yanis, who's also in the call here today. And we sum up with with our conclusions on the key benefits of smart and bidirectional charging. What we won't talk today here in the webinar is then on some work that we also did look broader into the literature and other studies on drivers and barriers. And also we developed and modeled some country-specific results for Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Poland, and UK, which are also available, but will be not discussed or presented here today. So let me just directly jump into the first analysis that we did. So we tried to pick the power system perspective and try to analyze the whole energy system. And we used our energy system model that we have at our institute, mainly the Enertile system model that can cover whole of Europe, is intensively used also for Germany, and used to derive policy recommendations and system impacts on different levels. And it covers mainly the energy system with the generation and demand side, and also the infrastructures. And as a key question here, we analyzed the cost and the overall benefits on the cost side that V2G can bring. And to understand a little bit also the results, it's good to know what is covered and included in that. So typically costs that occur here in the power systems are investments and fixed costs on the operation side of these different assets that are included in that, plus variable costs, mainly fuel costs, but also costs for CO2 emissions or other variable operating and maintenance costs that are picked up in this model. The third block of costs that are included here are then also the transport infrastructure costs for electricity, heat and hydrogen, and also storage costs. What we didn't consider here, and that's also important to keep in mind, is any additional costs for the bidirectional charging equipment. So with the savings that you see here, this additional cost has to be covered as well. With this short view on the modeling approach, some insights in the approach that we did and how we set up this modeling analysis. So we did three different scenarios that we looked at. One which considered uncontrolled charging of cars and trucks, and was used as a reference. And then we had two scenarios that we analyzed, where we can control cars, and in the second one also we added trucks to this scenario, and define specific shares of cars that can participate in smart and bidirectional charging, and we assess then the cost differences that these scenarios have if they fulfill the long-term energy system and climate goals that were set as a boundary condition for this scenario. And with this, it was possible to try to derive the specific value that smart and bidirectional charging can bring to the power system, keeping other influencing factors on the cost of the power system at the same. Yeah, on the right side, you see here then the number of vehicles that we assume in our scenario analysis, and you see that it substantially increased over time. So later on, I will show you especially the scenario with the largest number of vehicles that would be used for smart and bi-directional charging. And yeah, just keep that in mind if you see the results later on. Coming from the numbers of vehicles that are growing in the future, these are the input data that we use in the development of the data on final energy demand. You see here on the left side the strong decrease of final energy demand in the transport sector, mainly due to one of the most important benefits of electric cars, that are much more efficient than cars that we have nowadays. So total energy demand decreases substantially, and at the same time, that's what you see here in the middle graph, the electricity demand at the same time increased quite substantially. There were also some assumptions on mobility shifts. So at one stage, we won't expect any further growth of the number of cars in our scenarios. So that was the reason why it didn't increase further also in the long term. That was a bit different in the transport sector with trucks and vans, which were more correlated to the industry activities. And here on the right side, you then see the promise of smart and bidirectional charging. You see here the availability for smart charging of cars over a year, how we modeled that. So in gray and white, you see the times of the day. So it's picking up it's built up in minutes over the year. So you see all the time here when cars are available and at what time they are connected to the grid, and all the green and blue areas, that would be times when the cars could be connected to the grid and could contribute also to system benefits. And yeah, it's obvious that there's a large number of cars and batteries available that could be contributing to the power system. Then moving from this assumptions and data that we used for our modeling to one snapshot of the key results that we generated with such model. So you see here the large number of technologies that are covered in that. I talk you through from left to right. You see here the first two figures are indicating the electricity generation for the EU 27 in total, and which technologies are used to fulfill the energy and climate goals. And you see that electricity demand in general increases, and yeah, we use that as a reference without smart and bidirectional charging. And on the figures next to it, you see then the changes in the different scenarios that we had to identify how the system changes if smart and bidirectional charging would be feasible and available in the power system. And the same here on the left side, you see it for the electricity generation, and on the right side for the installed capacities. And the main changes that we identified here in the modeling was that we see the cost optimal portfolio of renewable energies would shift if I include smart and bidirectional charging in the system from wind and also concentrating solar power more to PV generation. So the daily change of PV could be easily or more easily integrated in the system with V2G cars, and that makes the whole power system cheaper. At the same time, we see utilization of V2G discharging. So if the system has the availability to use these cars as batteries, it was also utilized in the model. And on the right side, you see a second effect. You also see here the shift of the portfolio. So not only the generation changes, but also the capacities of PV and wind. But we also see that you need less flexible generation, which would serve as a backup capacity. So this is mainly hydrogen turbines and battery storage systems that would fulfill this role of smart and bidirectional charging in the power system if this would be not available. So these are the technical explanations, what changes in the system. And the last slide I have here on the power system, and I then shows you the cost savings that we see. And in 2040, if you look here on the scenario cars and cars 2 and trucks and vans, which has the largest number of vehicles available for smart and bidirectional charging, we see a cost saving of more than 22 billion euros in 2040, which transfers to a cost reduction of the power system of roughly 8.6% that we identified here. And the main reason, as I said, was that less capacity during peak hours is needed, better integration of PV generation, and also investment needs for alternative storage technologies and backup power are reduced. So with this, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Yanis, and he will talk you through the effects of grid and user perspective.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'll dive right into the grid system perspective. So we want to answer the question how the low voltage distribution grids can handle the challenge of the future supply task. And in order to do so, we started in Germany and we took a national scenario for 2030 and 2040, you see on the left here, and distributed it to the low voltage grids. What we did is we actually created all of the low voltage networks in Germany for all the around 11,000 administrative boundaries you see here. And that led to around 800,000 grids, which we then clustered to find the most representative ones. And each orange circle you see here on the map represents one of the grids that were found to be the most representative one. And these grids we used for further calculations. So we distributed, if you take a look at the column for 2040, 10 million heat pumps, 30.7 million electric vehicles, and 240 gigawatts of solar rooftop power to the buildings in Germany. And we then, which is a special feature of this analysis, created time series for each house that is part of the network. On the bottom left, you can see how this looks for different customer types. We considered here a family teleworker and a full-time worker. So we were able to do annual time series calculations in our low voltage networks, and we could identify the bottlenecks in the networks and calculate the most cost-effective grid reinforcement measures to safely meet the supply task. Oops, what happened? Okay. Marian, can you change the slides then, or did you do it at the same time? I'm not sure. So here we see the results then. What we did is we took into account the urbanization types of each of the networks we took a look at. And you see it, we start with dense population, medium density, and then sparse population on the right side. The left plot shows the grid expansion costs in billion euros for 2030, and the left one shows the same for 2040. We considered 3 different control strategies, one being the uncontrolled charging, one option where we considered economically optimized charging, which included PV optimized charging in terms of self-consumption, but also the possibility to account for varying price signals. And then as an add-on, we took a look at one specific grid-friendly control strategy, which is the blue bar, where we assumed that the distribution system operators can monitor the transformer loading, and if there is a overloading, they can request flexibility from all plugged-in EVs. And the finding is that for 2030 for Germany, the costs sum up to 10.75 billion euros for the uncontrolled change. And we see that the control strategies can slightly decrease this. Actually, the economically optimized charging approach does decrease it for the medium density, while the grid-friendly controller can decrease it in the sparsely populated areas. And for 2040, the costs rise to 29 billion euros. And we see that the grid-friendly controller can decrease costs in all population densities, while the picture is more diverse for the economically optimized charging approach, where the costs rise in the medium density and fall in the other categories. I'll try to switch the slide. Yeah, so the goal was to find the results not only for Germany, but for Europe. And in order to figure this out, we took into account the distribution of the population by country, which you see in the table at the bottom, and we just used this to interpolate the results we found for Germany. And what you see here in the bar plot is for 2040. The potential savings we find when we apply the grid-friendly control charging, which for the EU, including UK in this case, sums up at 10.6 billion euros. So the number is not that high comparing it to the total amount of cost, but we did not find a bad impact, and we in most cases find even a benefit from the control strategies. All right, continuing with the user perspective. So what we did is a cost-benefit analysis of smart and bidirectional charging, as Marian said in the introduction already. I want to quickly break down the methodology as time is limited. So starting top left, we assumed charging infrastructure with 11 kilowatt charging in different battery sizes, and created time series for parking. And for different types of customers, we created residential time series for teleworker, office workers, and a family. And these combined were the basic input for the EV optimization model. We then added the possibility for different European countries to account for different price signals, which originated from the day-ahead prices. And we also took into account the PV potentials per country to be able to, in case of a rooftop PV system, account for the self-consumption. This all was used in a techno-economic evaluation in the end, where we also took into account aging of the battery, but as time is limited, that's not part of my presentation today. So the EV optimization itself, we did this for different control strategies, starting with the baseline where electric vehicles just were plugged in upon arrival. We implemented a PV optimized controller where the self-consumption basically was optimized. We also integrated a price optimized version that does only take into account the electricity price that may change over time. And finally, one controller that combines these two. All of these calculations have been done for the unidirectional charging as well as for bidirectional charging. All right, so the results of our analysis is we see a large potential for cost saving for all types of customers, basically. Just to break down the plot quickly, so this begins with the unidirectional charging only. We see the total annual electricity costs per year, in this case for a teleworker, and it's shown for different countries and for different battery sizes, but let's focus on Germany here. So the turquoise bars only. We see a baseline without PV and a baseline with PV. And then in comparison to that, we see the total electricity bills when applying a price optimized charging or a PV plus price optimized charging. So for this teleworker, we see that the costs fall by 12% for the price optimized only. If we consider PV optimization, this ranges from 31 to 36% when considering varying price signals too. We find that this is true for all kinds of customers. It's in the text, so 21% for a full-time worker, for 22% for a family, and here shown up to 36% for the teleworker. And we also see that the findings are similar over the different countries we observed. So to finish things up with my final slide, what has changed? We now take a look at the bidirectional charging, and we see that the costs can be further decreased by up to 9% compared to the unidirectional charging. It's basically most beneficial all the time. And yeah, so the highest number we saw in the simulation is a saving of 45%, which is a great amount in case for the teleworker shown in the right here. All right, then I will give back to you, Marian.
Yes, thank you. I think I can just shortly summing up the discussion. So our conclusion here is, that the benefits that we just saw for individual users, that the benefits go beyond that. So you saw here in the modeling results that smart charging and V2G can relieve the transformation pressure in increasing the renewable generation, picking up electrification in all demand sectors, and building up grid infrastructure. We see here a reduced need for flexible resources in the power system, and this is one of the key benefits that we found in our analysis. And if you look specifically to the capability to feeding electricity back to the grid compared to smart charging, the biggest benefits can be seen in avoiding backup capacities, especially on the gas and hydrogen side, and also reduce the utilization of the power generation from gas and hydrogen. So in our modeling world, this is an optimized approach, but in real world, these benefits might be even higher because the counterfactual scenario wouldn't be as smooth maybe as we assumed it here in this. One additional remark to the truck flexibility. So with the approach that we took, there was an effect of truck flexibility as well, but it was lower than for cars, and mainly we assume that trucks are driving much more on daytime compared to cars, and this reduced the capability to integrate PV into the power system, and therefore the impact was lower. Finally, if we assume higher price variability and also market participation of EV users in this last user perspective, where the focus was more on the home usage of V2G, then the impacts might be even higher. And we identified that also in our literature review, so that could be also looked at in the report. Yeah, with this, I'd like to finish our presentation of the results and hand over to Julia back for the discussion and the other speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you for this very, very rich presentation of so many results. And I'm sure many people here on the call would really like to dig deeper. There's been a lot of questions on the specifics of methodology, which I do suggest that we probably won't have time to cover. And it's something that everyone can find in the report or, follow up with emails. As a next step, I would like to pass the floor to Fabian, who is our policy manager leading and talk about the policies and what all this means for us here in Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. So I want to keep it relatively brief. So we just heard that bidirectional charging can actually, or batteries on wheels can actually save quite substantially the European power system. So we can save billions and billions of euros every year by slashing battery storage needs, by integrating more solar PV into the power system. And last but not least, also EV drivers can significantly reduce their final electricity bill. And then just one side note for all those people in the call who haven't had a chance to look at the study, you can scan the QR code. It will lead you directly to our landing page. It will also be on the last slide of this presentation. So we clustered our recommendations into two categories. One is incentives, the other one is interoperability. Incentives is largely not only for EVs, but it's also for all kinds of flexibility options. And what you see here now, this is not an exhaustive list, but is what we identified as main recommendations for the time being. And one crucial element is that member states really speed up on the implementation of the EU's electricity market design that was just adopted at the beginning of this year. And there are a few crucial points here. One is that grid operators need to switch their grid planning approach from a purely investment or like a copper in the ground driven approach to a more TOTEX, so like an approach that also focuses on operating costs, which means that they need to use the existing grid infrastructure more efficiently, which automatically would make demand-side flexibility options like EVs more attractive. Another important point is the lowering of the bid sizes for day and intraday market trading of electricity to 100 kilowatt, which is today at 500 kilowatt. And the lower this barrier is, the easier it actually is for EV drivers, but also for fleet operators and for aggregators to get into this intraday market with EVs. Then, of course, Julia mentioned it already in the beginning, we need flexible electricity tariffs, which are not the standard everywhere, obviously, because we need incentives for people to actually use their cars as a storage and flexibility option. And then this is in brackets, the smart meter rollout, simply because it looks good in some countries and it doesn't look so good Germany with the smart meter rollout, but it's of course essential to enable V2G. And then last but not least, mobile storage, so EVs again, should not be double taxed. So at the moment, in many instances, you're actually taxed if you draw electricity from the grid and if you feed it back to the grid. And both is, of course, well, it's not good for the V2G business case. And then I come to our second set of recommendations, which is interoperability. And here, it's of course crucial, and I think like all stakeholders in the field say that we need to enable the communication between the car, the charger, and then the grid. But we also looked at this a bit more from a hardware perspective, because we think it's a bit overlooked sometimes. Because it's also part of our study, but it was not mentioned now in the presentation. But there are actually two technologies to enable bidirectional charging. One is DC bidirectional charging, where the main job, so to say, happens in the DC charger, in the DC wall box, or AC bidirectional charging, where the onboard charging unit of the car is actually doing the main job. The problem is that both technologies are not necessarily compatible. While AC bidirectional charging, so if the onboard charger of the car can do bidirectional charging, works with an AC or DC charger, the other way around, it's not possible. And that could, at least in the long run, create a problem, because it could reduce the potential of V2G in the long run. And our recommendation, hence, is that every new EV that comes on the European market is able to charge with virtually every charger, whether it's AC or DC, in a bidirectional way. And this could be achieved if the onboard charger of every new EV is bidirectional by default. And this could be done via a change in the type approval regulation, for instance. Then, of course, the other important point is the infrastructure that also needs to be bidirectional. And here, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, that was also just adopted this year, has targets for private charging infrastructure in residential and non-residential buildings. And we think this should be the bidirectional capability of all those chargers in those buildings needs to be ensured and should be mandated. The same, to a lesser degree, though, goes for public chargers. Not for all public chargers, of course, because if you go to a fast charging station, you just want to draw electricity and you don't want to feed anything back. But for slow chargers, so roadside chargers where people plug their car for 8, 9, or 10 hours, bidirectional charging could make sense, and this could be tackled. We are targeted revision of the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. And that's it from my side. Back to you, Julia.
Thanks a lot, Fabian. Loud and clear on what needs to be done. So far, you've all heard about the various benefits and results of the analysis, which are impressive. You've also heard what we believe needs to happen in the next few years for that potential to be realized. What we'd like to do next is to also briefly hear from some of the key stakeholders in the ecosystem, without which we can't really do this. So first of all, I'd like to give the floor to Markus Fendt. If Markus, you could, yes, unmute yourself and show us your face. So Markus is the managing director of the Mobility House, a company that is actually making it happen and doing what we are all talking about. So Markus, what are some of your reflections on what you've heard and some of the key takeaways from the business perspective on what we need to do?
Thank you, Julia. Thanks to the speakers, and especially great thanks to doing such an elaborated work on it, because there are still a lot of prejudices on V2G and or bidirectional charging and the potential. And I think Another study where you could see the astonishing potential to a renewable energy system to make energy in the future when it's renewable cheaper, as well as save much more money on grid extensions as it is currently discussed in many countries in Europe. Let me mirror it very briefly along the value chain from the customer via the car manufacturer all the way to regulatory. What we currently see in the market. Mobility House is working since 15 years on bringing EVs into the renewable energy system. Our vision is 0-0, so 0 emissions by driving an electric car, but also 0 cost by utilizing the idle time of an electric car in the energy system. And this is what you have seen in that presentation and in the study. This is possible for various use cases, but it also depends. And after 15 years, 5 weeks ago, the first country and the first car manufacturer is live now with V2G. It's Renault in France. And there we apply 0-0 to customers when they plug in their car for 15 hours a day in average, so not every day, but in average. And for 10,000 kilometers, they get the power for free. So it starts now. You have the first examples. We could actually get more money out of the energy markets if it would be possible from a regulatory point of view. But this is the first examples. Please have a look into it, how it works, because this is now live. But still, it starts very small, which is, from us, from a business perspective, disappointing. But anyhow, we also have to understand customer psychology. It's brand new. Many countries of this world are not used to dynamic tariffs and to wholesale trading markets where actually this flexibility of an EV realizes value in. So we have to understand that there will be a couple of years now in explaining this new concept to customers, where just very few countries start with dynamic tariffs. We see from our customers a huge demand from the vehicle to home, so the PV environment, as also mentioned in the study. Yet there is, you can imagine, another complexity coming to the system, because to, on the one hand side, optimize your home, and on the other side, bringing an EV to the energy market is a complex optimization topic. So this has to be solved on an industry level also in the future. And I think that many customers will start via vehicle to home into the V2G field. And we also see first very starting interest from fleets, because they consider their vehicles as a tool. So wherever they make money additional or save money with their tool when it's standing, and surprisingly, a logistic fleet stands in average 14 hours a day. So even logistic fleets like the Amazon or Irish Post or Austrian Post, which we have as customers, but also truck fleets, not long haul, but these point-to-point trucks, they stand in average 10 hours a day. So as you could also see in that study, there is a huge potential. From a car manufacturer side, we see all car manufacturers now tapping into that V2G topic. Why? Not so much driven by we want to do something good for our customers, but just on a commercial point of view. Because if you can make in a wholesale market with an EV around 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 euros a year, they want to tap into that value pool. So you have to imagine this is a yearly turnover you can achieve. So if you get 10-20% out of that, you substantially increase the profit you can make out of one vehicle, because currently the average margin or on a vehicle is 1,000 euros. So therefore, they look into that potential because they understand we are the biggest flexibility provider to the market. Just to give you one figure, Germany has around 100 gigawatt hours in vehicle batteries already in the system. We have 3% electric vehicles in the market, so battery electric vehicles. And our pumped hydro storages, which have been built the last 150 years, sum up to 40 gigawatt hours. So within 5-7 years, EVs surpassed it already twice, and we are just at the beginning of electrification. So you see Renault now is first, or actually I have to say Nissan, Mitsubishi have been first on CHAdeMO standard, but now Renault comes with a customer offering. Volkswagen can do V2G already on a slightly different standard. Kia, Hyundai is now opening their standard. The Chinese have it on GPT. And you will see within the next 2 years, more or less every car manufacturer already opening their cars or announcing it. The standards along the value chain would have been said AC/DC. It's more or less done. It's a matter of cost, absolutely right. And we will see, like we have seen on in the past in the video systems, what will really then surpass and win. And from my perspective, it doesn't matter if we do not have clarity there for the first 5 or 10% of market penetration. The industry and the price points will settle it for themselves. To reflect last on regulation and to give you also an impact put there, because in the study you have seen various countries and the potential in those countries. So as said, we started in France because they all have a smart meter, which is a prerequisite, because in wholesale market you need to do 15 minutes billing. And this makes it very, very easy in France. So the UK would be the next appreciating market, even better from a complete value set than France. Germany, where we are actually, is still discussing. We need a regulatory framework there. Double taxation is a huge issue there. This is also still the case in France. So would we remove that? Would the values in France could be higher? And then we see other countries, rather the smaller ones in terms of EV, total EV sales, not penetration. Certainly Netherlands, then followed by Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Yet the value will not be so high there because, especially in the Nordics, because they have hydro power supply, and the values are higher the more renewable energy you have, so or intermittent renewable energy, which you can tap into with your vehicle. So to sum up, it's starting. We have all seen the potential. Cars make a lot of sense. It's starting. You need the car manufacturers now to shift. We need charger manufacturers, which are appearing. You need an aggregation party. You need a trading party. And then for sure also the energy supply. And you see various players now tapping into it. But still, it's so much in its infancy. We need now all the regulatory support to really make it happen in front of the customer. Why? Because it brings, I think, much more success to all our climate activities, because customers see that renewables are cheaper, that kind of EVs are cheaper, and that new technologies achieve CO2 savings without cost, without additional cost. So we can tackle our climate change problems by technology, and I think V2G is one of those very good examples.
Thanks so much, Markus. Thanks a lot for this really great insights and some of the really practical examples and experiences you've seen in different countries. So last but absolutely not least, I would like to give the floor now to Matthew Baldwin, who is Deputy Director General in the European Commission in the unit, in the director, in the DG for energy. So really the place where a lot of these policies are born and happen, and a lot of, I would say, legislative power and intelligence on this lies. So Matthew, it would be really great to hear some of your insights and comments on what you've heard so far, and what would you take as some key takeaways from this?
Oh, thank you, Julia. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and I shall try to be quick because, in fact, I see some extremely learned and good questions which need answering in the course of the time we have left. It's great to be on with my current hat on, which is, as you say, the Energy Department of the European Commission. I come from before the Mobility Department, where I was a strong advocate for sustainable mobility, such as the work that's always been pushed by T&E, and thank you for all your efforts, of which, of course, EVs are a big part. And my summary, too long don't read, version of my remarks is, congratulations on this excellent study. I mean, timing is everything in life. You brought this out at a pivotal moment, not just in terms of the European Union's climate and energy transition journey, but also because, as you will probably know, we are at the moment of transition institutionally too. We have a new parliament following the elections in June. We will have a new commission coming into action from the 1st of December, we hope, with the big hearings of the new commissioners, including the new energy commissioner designate, Dan Jorgensen, in front of the parliament to take place next week. So you brought this pivotal topic and linked series of topics onto the table at the right moment. And of course, it's the right moment because we also know we're going through, and if I could just give you 2 words on the big picture, electrification of our economies. We know that this is going to be pivotal. Our studies for 2040 suggest we'll need to double the electrification of the EU economy. And in that context, e-mobility will play a crucial role by delivering efficient, secure, decarbonized energy and transport systems to be part of this picture. It's also very good in timing terms because we look across Europe, car manufacturers under huge pressures. You will have seen Volkswagen talking about closing down a number of factories here in Belgium, pressure on the Audi factory here. But at the same time, embracing, as Marcus has just said very well, embracing these new models. The Renault launch is a big step. It's a non-interoperable, closed loop, first version of bidirectional charging, but it's very welcome. When I saw them in Berlin last week, they're at pains to stress, this is not a test, this is real, we're going to market with this thing. If you, again, staying on the big picture for a moment, you have seen that we've upped our renewable energy targets as part of Repower EU in response to the Russian invasion. We've upped our energy efficiency targets. We've got very ambitious legislation now in place in terms of rolling out charging and recharging infrastructure. We have the EU ban on the sale of new internal combustion engines from 2035 on the table, all providing, I think, a strong drive towards EVs, allowing us to reduce our dependence on imported fossil fuels and facilitating integration between transport and the power system. What's exciting for me about your study is the numbers it brings, and I think we'll take those away, and I'm sure everyone's going to have different versions of the numbers, but the order of magnitude is super important. This changes the value proposition for owning an EV against owning a conventional car. Even in the potential future where we will have road charging on road prices, it changes the value proposition. It changes the value proposition in terms of affordable energy. Our new commissioner designate is charged with coming up with a plan for affordable energy. Well, your ideas laid out in the study will be a big part of that. And the third point I want to make is, I think it's critical at this time, as globally speaking, I don't think, I think that you'll see the European Green Deal coming under some pressure now. Where are the benefits to consumers? Where are the benefits to society, to our manufacturing, our users, our households coming from? And we need to pull together these visible projects about the Green Deal, which show the benefits of delivery, lower energy bills, reduced costs of driving, not to mention the impact on the grids, which I think is becoming much more widely known. So you know, the numbers about electrification of cars are pretty stunning. A six-fold increase since 2019. 22% of all new cars registered in the EU are electric. We see coming on stream in the next few years a number of much cheaper models of electric vehicle. All of this, I think, is extremely valuable. At the moment, recharging is limited to one direction from the grid to the car, but we know that more EVs in use, the more of them will be plugged into the grid for longer, and that's where all of this comes into play. The numbers we've been using are to have that EU passenger EVs on current forecasts would bring 3 tegawatt hours of available battery capacity by 2030, which we are describing as roughly equivalent to 40% of the union's daily average energy demand. Your numbers more up to date. We'd like to have a look at them, but I think they're, if anything, even more spectacular. And in terms of our grids, with flexibility needs expected to double by 2030, these vehicle to grids can play a really central role in mitigating the burden on the grid. Your study shows this, I think, very well, acting as a new backbone to the system, allowing recharging, of course, when renewable energy is abundant, re-injecting a load into the grids during peak periods. So, in summary, 3 things. We think bidirectional charging is going to be crucial in terms of the flexibility and stability of the grid, in terms of enabling consumers to get the best possible deals, to share the benefits of the electricity market in terms of getting more affordable energy, and supporting the efficient integration of variable renewable energy sources into the grid. So I hear you say, if this is also great, what's the Commission doing about it? Well, we're working in a number of areas. Firstly, energy flexibility is central to all of this. And for any of this to work, we need the right incentives. Data share will be crucial in that respect, as we move towards this smarter, more integrated energy system. The Renewable Energy Directive, as well as EMD, which you mentioned, is now into force, with key provisions on battery-related data sharing in real time and at no cost. We've produced a guidance document, which I think will be very helpful in terms of helping member states implement these provisions. We're discussing with stakeholders, including yourselves, how we can complement these guidelines, but this will be really crucial. Apart from what you've already mentioned in terms of EMD, and I fully agree with what you said, 3 other quick areas. Firstly, the network code on demand response, which will further develop our flexibility services, specify the roles and the procedures for service providers to aggregate flexibility, for example, from the EV batteries to be offered in wholesale and local markets, describing the roles and the responsibility for how you can participate in demand response. And there will be an implementing act specifying the requirements for data exchanges linked to customers, addressing all the possible use cases from the demand response network code. Secondly, within the digitalization action plan that we published back in 2022, you've now got a new data for energy, inevitably D4E, data for energy group, bringing new tools and procedures for enhancing interoperability and data exchange right across the value chain, working to develop 3 priority areas, one of which I'm glad to say is smart and bidirectional charging of electric vehicles. I could go on, but I see I'm really running out of time. Just in terms of additional reactions to the report, what I think, I hope this triggers is a series of thought synapses right across this community. I think we need to think in terms of overall supply chains. I fully agree with what Marcus has said in this. And yes, we also need to think, if you like, in terms of the regulatory supply chain, all the small and large regulatory steps to be taken at the European and the national and indeed sometimes local levels needed to make this happen. Back to my point about projects appearing on the ground. If bidirectional charging remains a largely theoretical benefit for the future, we won't see that broader benefit being realized. And think in an expansive way, not just from the pure owner-user perspective of the electric vehicle, how much money customers can recoup by selling back to the grid, but imagine a situation where indeed individual commuting decisions are driven by the relevant properly costed package of costs and benefits. If we arrive at a situation, and I know T&E, this is a subject close to your heart, where the full external cost of the journey is internalized, the cost of congestion, the cost of road crashes, with road pricing as the driver, you have an even better incentive to use your car as a battery and only to use it for the journeys where it's really justified in terms of the overall costing. Your decisions may, in short, be different. And let's fire the starting gun on all the potential alternative business models out there for this in terms of, again, going beyond just existing car ownership and use. I was struck by Marie's point in the chat about demonstrating the overall benefits in terms of equity for society as a whole. Imagine a situation in the future where a big multi-story car park in cities is given over to a floor of bidirectionally charged vehicles, where the decision of the owner of those vehicles as to whether to lease or rent those vehicles out for use on a shared mobility basis is triggered itself by the alternatives that can be made for her or him in terms of the price that can be got in selling back to the grid. And then individual consumers making those real-time decisions, again, when the benefits are really spelled out. There are lots of different ways I think we can use bidirectional charging for the benefit of society as a whole. But again, back to my short version, your report is incredibly welcome. It'll be very well read. I congratulate you on it and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Matthew, thank you so much for those insights and also a great reminder of some of the things that are already in the works in the Commission and where we can all make actually some changes and make them work. So I hope people can still stay for just a few more minutes. We really are running out of time, but I'd like to at least ask you all one question each. So maybe you can all come on screen. So all together, if it's possible, if you all just, open your cameras. We have received a lot of questions, so we will not be able to answer them all here, but what I can promise to you is that we have taken note of all of them and we will circulate them with all our speakers and then also come back to you with answers. And I really, really want to remind you all that a lot of answers to your questions, especially about the methodology, can all be found in the report that was published today. So maybe I will start, and I would like to ask you all to be brief in your answers so we can all let the audience go and then eventually also all continue with our day-to-day, but maybe a minute or two each. First of all, I'd like to ask the question to you, Marian and Yanis. So there are a lot of questions in the chat about what impact this has on the lifetime and capacity of batteries. A lot of people worried about that. There have been previously concerns about them. I myself am aware of reports, in still 2017-18, where this seemed to be a problem. So what do you see in terms of that? What is your answer to those asking, what will it do to my battery as an EV driver?
Yes, who should answer? Yanis, you want to answer on that, or should I go forward?
Go ahead if you want to. I can add.
Yeah, okay. So in the study, you will find some more details on this question, and we used some battery aging models. It was a colleague from Fraunhofer ISE who worked on that, and the answer was that there are a lot of opportunities if you operate your battery in a controlled manner, that this could at least not harm the battery compared to an uncontrolled approach, and even improve that. So from the analysis that we did there, I would say that the fears that V2G charging would harm the battery could not be kept up. So if you drive a long way and use it at fast charging stations, you might harm your battery much more than if you use it in a very controlled approach at your home and move in specific state of charge areas. So that was, in brief, I would say, the outcome, and didn't show up as a showstopper for V2G concepts, I would say.
Julia, may I add some practical tests, or actually live samples we have done with various car manufacturers, being it Mercedes, Tesla, Audi, Renault, Nissan. We have 4,500 batteries car batteries under management in first and second life applications, stationary, and have done a lot of energy product with them. And the fear all the car manufacturers had in the beginning about degradation is totally gone now. And they will give a framework at the end per car, what you can do, and it will not degrade the battery so that it is visible in front of the customer.
Thanks, great. Thanks for that. So the concern should no longer be there. If we control it, we do it in the right state of health, basically in charge of the battery, it won't harm it. The next question I actually have to you, Marcus. So there has also been a number of questions. I'll try to package them into one for the interest of time. But you have a lot of really that practical experience. Maybe you can say a few more words today based on the different regulatory environments in member states. Where is it the easiest today to give value to V2G to customers? So in what countries does it work best? And even as some people are asking, maybe some parts of the country, is it in a city or more in a rural area that you really get a lot more benefits for the grid, for example, from doing that? And where there are no good regulatory requirements, so the regulatory environment is harder, what is your approach as a company? How do you still manage to operate and make it a success there? For example, in Germany, where we don't have smart meters.
Yeah, Germany, we are not successful, unfortunately, because of that. Matthew and I had a meeting last week with the Minister of Economics that overburden regulation. In principle, there are two things. How easy is it to access the energy market? And the other one, how high up is the need for flexibility in the energy system as well as in the grid system. So a market, to the latter one, a market where you have a lot of renewable energies, they need solutions to incorporate or to work with that intermittence. So those markets normally have created energy products, like you can see in the UK especially. You can see it in Texas, you can see it in Germany to some extent as well, to cope with the intermittence. So there you create value for the customer. Then the second, ideally you have the same on the grid side. So Germany has a very good grid. The UK, they have rather a weak grid. So the first kind of grid products appeared with auctions in the UK. So if you don't charge at certain times in certain zip codes, you get paid for that. So ideally you have both the grid and the energy market where you can create value with the flexibility of an EV. And the second thing is the accessibility. And there, the key is always a smart meter and a regulatory framework for small decentralized assets. And as Matthew said, the European Union is demanding that from all member states. So it is given in the started with Fit for 55 in the RED 3. It's demanded, but the question is how and when do the member states implement it? And so France is very easy accessible because they all have a smart meter. They still have some regulatory barriers on double taxation, not so high as in Germany, but still it is there. UK also has a lot of smart meter, also double taxation, but high values in the energy market. Germany has high value in the energy market, no smart meter and double taxation. So all these parameters you have to consider when you tap into the market. And these three markets are the most interesting one. Certainly Spain and Italy, but they are very monopolistic. Netherlands second, also, but smaller in terms of just market size. And the Nordics, as I say, they have hardly any intermittence, and therefore the value would not be so high, but they are easily accessible due to smart meter rollout already.
Thanks.
And internationally, there is just Texas available more or less, and some pockets, pilot pockets, but that's more or less it.
Thanks so much. Thanks very much for this overview. A lot of really, really interesting actually insights on how it works in different countries. So Matthew, I'd like to come to you next. In fact, you have already alluded to that question by Marie, which was indeed the starter question that I wanted to ask you. So making sure that these benefits accrue to everyone, maybe not 100%, but equally, and we all benefit as a society, and there is also low-income households that benefit, is really, really important. Also in our vision as T&E for a fully zero emissions mobility system. Ultimately, people will be buying different EVs. Someone will buy a much cheaper, simpler model. Someone will go for a premium. Some people will simply be sharing vehicles and just renting them for a few days. So how can we make sure that all of these people, if they want to, can benefit from bidirectional capability? And as our study alludes to, wouldn't you consider, on top of the things that you're already doing in the Commission, to also mandate this as a standard so everyone always has access to this?
Well, it's a very good and a very big question. And it kind of, because it's almost a political question, I think it's exactly the type of question that if I were him, Commissioner Johansson, would be thinking about in the context of affordable energy. And by the way, he's also charged with affordable housing. And of course, these two issues come together in that respect as well. And look, I think some of the questions are really well put. You've been kind enough to draw attention to the essential infrastructure, if you like, in terms of the big regulations being in place. We've talked about it, the EMD, the Renewables Energy Directive, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. I think we do need to go down further, if I can dare use this terrible word, ecosystem, in terms of more coordination around aligned European and international standards under the solid, if somewhat steady, work of the standardization development organizations, AIEC, ISO, and so on. In this context, there's a number of technical legislative acts also being prepared to ensure interoperability, to make sure that bidirectional recharging is operational right across the EU. There's a standard, if I can bear to use the name of it, ISO 1511820, to make sure that you've got charging point operators required to have truly bidirectional capabilities in what they're offering. And I think we should think again about how we can make sure these standards are used precisely to also get to that broader point about affordability. So extremely welcome. Somebody also mentioned taxes. I think it was Marcus. Double taxation could strangle this whole thing at birth. Member states have it in their hands now to avoid that, to avoid that this important mechanism is not killed just as it's getting off the ground. And we think it's also incumbent on the market and member states and regulators working together to make sure that we can try to develop really attractive cost-saving measures that apply to everyone, such as modern energy tariff models that are really based around flexibility and incentivizing, demand response behaviors. The key to all of this is we keep these conversations going at the European level and at the national level, and of course, not just in the commercial level, the local level as well. Marcus mentioned the very welcome initiative taken by the German Economics Ministry to really dig down into the situation in Germany. The minister's led himself these discussions. He's been engaged in a personal way, which I think is wholly admirable. And we're going to need 27 conversations like that, as well as big European conversations to make sure we drive this forward. Huge potential and promise, not yet realized.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, a lot of work and collaboration for all of us and going on this to make this a reality. Fabian, coming to you last with my final question. It is a little bit something we hear sometimes as well. So many benefits, as we've heard today. There's so many benefits of V2G costs for, say, for consumers. It's the cheapest option. It's quite obvious. Marcus, of course, was rightly pointing out just how car makers are very interested in this and they're bringing models on the market. So the question really to you is, would it not happen on its own? Do we really need a lot more regulation and a standardization in this?
Well, I think that's the big question, because the market is still a little bit in its infancy. It's unclear where the journey goes. But as I mentioned before, there are those two approaches at the moment by car makers, and one going for more the DC bidirectional charging option, the others for the AC bidirectional charging option. And from a hardware perspective, those two are not compatible always. So you can't really use every car with every charger. Obviously, so far, it's not really clear whether all go one way or the other. But if that doesn't happen, I think it would make sense to make sure that from a hardware perspective, the interoperability is mandated, because otherwise you have a lot of, well, not stranded assets, but you can't really use your EV then as a storage option.
Thanks a lot. So it might happen, but not necessarily in the most consumer and systems friendly way. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for all of your insights. Unfortunately, that's all the questions we have time for now. Thank you also to the audience. As I mentioned, we will share both the slides as well as the recording of this, and we will come back to you on the questions. The final thing I want to say, let's all collaborate, let's cooperate on this, let's work together to really make this a success. We have this cheap, incredible resource, energy resource in our hands. So at least that one, let's not squander. So thanks a lot and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.